Rump Chapter 22. The Wool Witches. The girl grabbed me by the arm and yanked me inside. The first thing I noticed was a delicious smell, sweet and spicy. My stomach growled. Food, real food. The room was large, but it was many rooms in one, just like my cottage. The kitchen, the bedroom, and the sitting room all occupied their own corners of one big open room, which was bursting with colors and patterns. Sunlight poured in from 3 tall windows, their curtains intricately embroidered with vines, birds, and blossoms. 4 chairs circled a big oak table. They were painted in bright blue, violet, yellow, and green, and each was built in its own unique style and shape, as if they had been designed for very different people. A large bed took up an entire wall and was covered with a blanket woven in rich rainbow colors. The room seemed to hum as if it were alive. "Now, what is your name?" the girl asked. "No, let me guess. I love guessing names." She put her fingers to her mouth and studied me. Maybe she was just a few years older than me, and pretty, with black curls all around her face, and eyes as green as new spring grass. "Your name is... it's Hubert." No, you don't look like Hubert." "Bertram? No, you don't have the right aura for that." "Ooh, tricky. Something unusual. One of a kind. Let me think. Zogemeyer? Woodenecht? Rolfando?" "Ida, who is it?" said a voice coming through a small doorway to the right. Another woman who entered looked very much like the girl, but older. She had gray streaked in her black hair and lines around her mouth and eyes. When she saw me, she froze. "Oh, my." The woman closed her eyes and took a deep breath, then opened them again. "What is it, sister?" said Ida. "Haddle, come here!" the old woman shouted. Another woman came hobbling in. This one looked more like a witch to me. She wasn't so old, but she was hunched and had a cane, and one foot was turned in. Her face was lopsided, one eye squinting while the other was wide. Her mouth was pinched and crossed, but when her big eye was level with mine, her expression softened and her mouth hung open. "Do you see it?" said the woman. "See what?" said Ida. "Anna," said the lopsided witch. "Anna was my mother," I said to them. Ida gasped. It was as if they had all been frozen by some spell, shocked into silence. I felt like an idiot. Finally, Ida broke into a laugh. "Nephew!" She rushed to me and crushed me against her, which might have felt comforting if I could breathe. When she released me, she squeezed my cheeks between her hands and said, "Isn't he beautiful? Our nephew, sisters, Anna's son! Who could ever have known?" The sisters blinked and came to me. She reached out a finger and lifted my chin. "He looks very much like Anna, doesn't he, Haddle?" Haddle finally broke down from her stupor as well, but she didn't come to me. She paused, looking over me with her big eye, and then grumbled, "I don't see it as something to rejoice over." She hobbled out of the room. Ida's cheerful face fell, and her older sister looked at me with a suspicious frown. This was a mistake. They didn't want me here. I shouldn't have come. I took a step back, but Ida caught me by the shoulder. "Oh, don't mind Haddle, dear nephew," Ida said. She has always been crabby. "This is Bathilda. We are so glad you came to us. You may call me Auntie Ida. Come on in and have a "Ida, we know nothing of the boy," Bathilda cut in. "Where he came from, how he found us, or even what his name is." "His name," Ida's face darkened. "I've been unable to guess it. So curious. I'm usually spot on." I looked between them. I was so tired. The idea of trying to explain my name and everything else overwhelmed me. I didn't really want to see the look on their faces. "My name is Robert." Bathilda furrowed her brow, confused. "Well," said Ida, looking disappointed, "I would have never guessed that." "How is it that you found us, Robert?" Bathilda asked. "I was in the village asking about my mother. No one remembered her, but when I asked about spinning—" Bathilda stiffened, but nodded. "They must know about my mother's spinning." "Oh, but come eat cake and see what we're making." Ida dragged me through a small corridor leading to another room, but Haddle barred the doorway with her walking stick. "You are filthy," she growled. "Haddle, Robert is our nephew, our guest." Haddle's big eyes looked me up and down, and I felt she could see every secret I held. Humph. Robert, you'll take a bath before you set foot in here. You look like you grew from dirt. The bathtub was in the corner of the kitchen. Mathilda poured hot water from the tub into the tub and held out soap and a brush to scrub myself. Then she left, and Ida left the room, though the doorway where Haddle had gone. After I washed, my clothes were hanging dry by the fire, so I wrapped myself in a quilt sewn with 100 different colors. I made that, Ida said when she returned. Do you like it? How do you get so many colors? I asked, brushing my hands over the intricate patterns. It's all in the fingertips. Wait until you see what I'm working on now. While my clothes dried, Ida fed me as much food as I could shove into my mouth, which was a lot. Not only had I forgotten what it was like to be clean, I had forgotten what it was like to eat real food instead of wormy sludge. This food was even better than the food I remembered eating, better than Martha's meat pies or Red's granny's stew. It was certainly better than sludge. There were beets and potatoes sprinkled in the herbs, and cheese and fresh bread and milk. I'd never had cake before, but it turned out to be a sort of bread that was sweet and crumbly and moist. I had 3 helpings. I was feeling rather sleepy after I ate, especially when I put on my warm, freshly cleaned clothes. But Ida had other ideas. She pulled me into the other room where Haddle and Bathilda were. I stopped in the doorway and gaped. Haddle had a spinning wheel, and piled at her feet were skeins of thread in colors that no dye could make. Red brighter than strawberries, yellow like sunshine, blue like the morning sky, blue like deep water, green like the forest leaves, and all shades in between. Colors I had never seen in the world. Bathilda was knitting what looked like a shawl, creating a fluid and intricate pattern with Haddle's rich threads. She worked with such speed and rhythm, her fingers and knitting needles became a blur. But what amazed me the most were the tapestries. Every inch of wall was covered with bright pictures full of life. A white unicorn in a field of orange poppies, dancing princesses, a knight shielding the red fire of a dragon, a maiden in a tower. In the middle of the room was a big loom strung with varying shades of thread. Ida went and sat behind the loom, moving her hands across the strings and weaving her threads in and out and around each other. As she drew the fibers together, they created vibrant pictures, birds and pixies, flowers, and they were so lifelike they seemed to breathe and move as if in a gentle breeze. Surely this was magic. Magic like how I spun the gold and how my mother had. As I watched, I had a tingling sensation in my toes and fingers, my head and my chest. This is where everything started, where I started. It all began with my mother, and she began here. How does it work? I asked. Enchantments, Ida said with a thrill in her voice. Magic. Ida, said Bathilda. It sounded like a warning. We do more of our own work than the magic does, said Ida. We just allow enough enchantment to give the fibers a nudge. You're nudging a little hard there, don't you think? Said Haddle. She had been spinning wool into a gentle shade of lavender, but as she spoke, the color deepened into a violent purple. It will fetch a good price at the market, said Ida. But what cost to you? Oh, Haddle, you worry too much. There is no greed or pride in this, only beauty. Haddle glared at the tapestry, but continued with her spinning, and as she fell back into rhythm, her threads lightened back to lavender. Can you only change the color of the threads? I asked. Or can you change what they're made out of? A little bit, but not too much, said Haddle. I would never be so foolish or greedy. She eyed me, and again I felt that she could see right down inside me, to the foolishness and greed that had gotten me into so much trouble. Haddle is very cautious, said Ida. We all would do well to be cautious, considering what happened to his mother, Haddle said, nodding toward me. Bathilda put her knitting down. Haddle, it could happen to anyone. Anyone foolish enough to be so greedy? Anyone can be greedy, said Ida. Clearly, said Haddle. Excuse me, I said, but I never knew my mother. Oh, you poor thing. We are being insensitive, said Ida. She dropped her work and rushed to comfort me. No, it isn't that. It's just, well, I hardly knew anything about her. I knew that she was from yonder and that she could spin. Her spinning wasn't like any other people's, but how foolish and greedy. The three aunts stopped what they were doing and exchanged cautious looks. Did she make any of this? I asked, pointing to the tapestries and yarns. No, Bathilda said. She traded everything she made. Including her soul, mumbled Hattel under her breath. Hattel! Gasped Ida. Our poor nephew! Well, he's poor because of her. Don't you think he has a right to know? They all fell silent. Bathilda and Ida stared at the ground, but Hattel watched me, her big eye twitching. I know about her spinning, I spoke up again, dancing around the questions I most wanted to ask. I wanted to know what had happened to my mother. I wanted to know if there was anything that could be done about my problems, but I couldn't decide much what I wanted them to know about me. I know that she could spin valuable things. Will you tell me what happened to her? Greed, said Hattel. Greed and magic sucked her in and spun her to death. Hattel, be sensitive, said Ida. It's the truth. You were too young to understand. Ida opened her mouth in protest, but Bathilda cut her off. She was a fine spinner, Bathilda said in a gentle voice, the finest there has ever been in yonder or anywhere. Not so fine considering, said Hattel. Bathilda glared at Hattel and began again. I will say she was unwise and a bit overly confident, even though she was a fine spinner, and that is where the trouble began. You see, Robert, in our work we must balance the skill of our own hands with the magic we use to transform the threads. She held out her knitting as if it were to show me. We do not call for more magic than we have skill, because then we lose control of the outcome. We lose control of ourselves. I thought of poor Kessler, and the sick dread in my stomach returned. Anna knew this, but she always pushed the limits. She was always experimenting. How? I asked. Bathilda put down her knitting and swept a strand of graying hair from her face. Your mother could spin wool into velvet and grass into silk. Beautiful threads. Her work was much admired, but we feared she was losing the balance. Yet somehow it never seemed to affect her. She always managed to bargain well at the markets, so in spite of our warning, Anna came to believe that her skill was more powerful than any magic. She thought she could control it, you mean? Bathilda nodded. One day Anna told a wealthy merchant that she could spin anything worthless into something beautiful and valuable. Well, he took her word. He had a bundle of straw in his cart and said he would be pleased with her skill only if she could turn the straw into gold. He promised her a fair trade if she could fulfill the task. I warned her, that fool, said Hattel, but she was all pride and greed. It was dangerous, to be sure, continued Bathilda. But she couldn't have known just how dangerous, said Ida. It wasn't her fault. That merchant was the greedy one. When she told me of the bargain she had made, I truly hoped she would fail, said Bathilda. Velvet and linen and silk were one thing, but gold, I didn't think of it to be possible. I hoped it wasn't, but to my dismay, Anna succeeded beyond what I could ever have imagined. She spun that straw into gold, into perfect, glimmering skeins of gold, more pure than any gold in the kingdom. But even her skill could not match the enormous magic of the spinning straw into gold.